We got told this past year that it was over for us. Now you're starting to, and the Jets were going to take over. And now you have fucking Tyrod Taylor.
Yeah.
And the Dolphins have no money and they're impotent. And it's like I've never seen a weaker. I feel like all the air has come right out of that fan base, that franchise.
You never had to listen to a podcast where it was like, well, EJ Manuel, yeah, he threw it over the 10th in training camp, but it was one throw. He's been pretty good for the most part.
To another edition of the Rock Pal Report podcast. I'm your host, Bill, season ticket holder Drew Gear. That's my producer, Chris Kruger. In studio with us, Ryan Lasel over at Hashtag Sports and Rock Sports Network. And we are here. I've adopted
back by popular demand.
I've stolen this from you, by the way. The whole thing on the lap, relax,
hey,
this is nice.
Hey, if you're not comfortable, like, what are we doing this for, man?
And what I love is that it has to chap Chris's ass. That I'm so relaxed in this seat holding the mic stand in my hand. Like,
what do you think, Chris?
Yeah, you can't go to your single because now you're in focus. When you lean back, you're out of focus.
Guys, I don't know if you've noticed, but directly behind me, for those of you listening to audio only, I swear to God, you're missing out on some of Chris's finest work.
I tell you what, if you're listening audio only, make sure you go to YouTube. Because we're going to do a live later. Mm-hmm. Make sure you go to YouTube so you can see what Drew is talking about. So it's an audio medium for now. Go to YouTube, like and subscribe on YouTube so you make sure you get the alerts when the guys go live. You can also check out this cool wall Drew's talking about. That's how you do it, Drew.
See, I love how, Chris, we've been doing this for almost a decade now, and we're still taking lessons on how to self-promote from this fucking guy.
Yeah,
I've been in the business a long time.
We don't promote very well.
Directly behind me, Chris has outdone himself once again in terms of studio construction. Chris, you want to walk the people through what it is you did here?
I took 2x4s and made a shelf and put bourbon on it. And then...
he's underselling this, folks.
If you look over Ryan's left shoulder, there's two picture frames. Those came in today. And right now they house sports section from the Buffalo News from... the week before Super Bowl 25 and the week after. So,
because he's a fucking masochist.
My dad saved all of these newspapers and gave them to me a couple years ago. I figured I'd put them in here somewhere. Now I built that wall over the last week, not wall, but shelves over the last week, and yeah, that's what we're going with.
For those of you who are just listening to this, I want you to, as a guy who builds things, like you're talking to a guy who literally pulled a door out of the, had to take the door out, not just off its hinges, but the actual door frame, all the trim, ripped it down, took the studs that it was mounted on out of, basically took it off the house to create a wider door frame so I could move something out of my basement, and then put it back. And right now, if you were to walk in my house, you wouldn't know unless I told you specifically where I made mistakes. You wouldn't be able to tell. As a guy who builds things, Chris didn't just put up some shelves. This thing is a work of art. Everything appears to be fairly level. The one shelf doesn't match the one next to it, but they are level in general with each other. Like the shelf across the way, perfect level. Not only that, but he peeled all of the old soundproof tiles off this back wall.
Nope.
They're still back there?
Yep.
See, this is what I love about this. This is basically a floating wall that you've created in this space where everything else is. So what it gives this the impression of, because you found a way to balance it on the other side with what I'm assuming then is plywood.
There's like a thin plywood for the backing.
Yeah.
But it's all 2x4s, and I got it within obviously they're mounted to the ceiling joists.
Yep.
So you're right to Ryan's left. All the way across is probably like 3/4 of an inch difference for the beams. Mm-hmm. And then so the total space underneath the shelves where I had to put some shims is like 3/8. So I was in 3/8 of floor to ceiling. all around.
And what I love
Not
about
bad.
this is that you found a way to make it flush across the wall so that it looks like it's recessed. You gave it an incredibly finished look. Guys, this is the Construction Hour brought to you by the Rock Pile Report. The Home Carpentry Hour. Like, Chris,
Yeah, well done, man.
you have outdone yourself.
I was telling Chris the last time I was here actually was when he gave you the final ultimatum and said, if you're not going to help me, I'm going to call your dad and have him help me. And then I come in and I was like, hey, nice wall, man. Did you and Drew do this? He goes, nope, did it myself. Drew hasn't even seen it yet. Doesn't even know I did it. So I think another opportunity for a audio to video medium to drive people to YouTube. And speaking of construction and things that are being built, what's going on here, man?
We're going to talk about that later. Guys, if you haven't seen it, go back and watch the live show where we talk about this mustache that I'm wearing with like, and no, it's not a handsome mustache. and I have a suspicion it might not ever be. But yeah, if you haven't checked out the live show, make sure you do. I've got a full explanation of this nonsense going on my upper lip. Check it out. See it before it's gone because it could be a one and done. We are here tonight in a brand new studio with a gorgeous backdrop of bourbon bottles behind me to talk about the Bills' defensive agency situation, the free agency situation, as we do sit a few nights away. I just want to talk about the market. I want to talk about a lot of the dynamics at play. The Bills are in a really interesting place when it comes to the 2025 free agency period. Like, financially, they're far from being considered a whale. You have teams like the Patriots who lead, Patriots, Raiders who lead the NFL in cap space. What I thought was funny, though, is that only 5 of the top 13 teams in the NFL are from the AFC in terms of cap space. Now, when you think about last year, how we were making fun of how mediocre the NFC was as a conference, it kind of makes sense then that there's so many teams from the NFC at the top of the with the most spending ability. When you look at it, it's like, oh, so maybe that them being all bad at the same time was kind of by design. Or some of them were paying for sins of the past. If you're the Saints, you're perpetually doing this. But
yeah, they're still paying.
But you look at the teams from the AFC that find themselves in that conversation, and it's the Steelers, the Patriots, the Raiders, the Chargers, and the Titans.
Mm-hmm. Chargers even more so now because they released Bosa this morning. So,
and it's mostly teams with either rookie quarterbacks or no quarterback.
well,
I don't
or
have
in the
a
case of the Chargers, Justin Herbert and nobody else.
Yeah, exactly. And then other AFC East teams, if you look at where they fall on the spectrum of cap space, are pretty much where we are. The Patriots, they're the silver tuna. The Jets are inheriting over $50 million in dead money if they don't find a dance partner for Devontae Adams, which by all accounts, it's not going to happen.
No.
And Rodgers is going to get released. And I mean, it could blow what the Jets end up with in terms of dead money at the end of this offseason cycle could blow what the Bills went into last year with out of the water.
Well, so with the Jets, like you when you look at it that way, you can understand why the reports coming out where they're like, yeah, the Jets feel comfortable moving forward into next season with Tyrod Taylor as their quarterback. It's like, well, yeah, because they're not going to be able to afford anybody else.
They don't have a choice. Tyrod Taylor's
not by design. Nobody chooses a 35-year-old Tyrod Taylor to be their quarterback.
It's like the thing when you're like, hey, I'd like to go out to the free agency. I want to go out to the free agent market and get a quarterback. And your mom goes, hey, we have a quarterback at home. Yeah. We have McDonald's at home. And you go home and it's a burger on white bread with crinkle cut French fries out of the oven. And you go, man, Jesus, here.
And not even the good white, like the butt of the white bread, right? Like the butts of the white bread.
It's Topps brand white bread.
Yeah.
That Mark Smith, I guarantee you, still eats to this day by the loaf.
Marked down when mom bought it because it was like the day it expired.
Yeah.
She's like, it's still good for another few days.
Like, that's what the Jets are dealing with. It's also funny that Miami's going to basically tread water.
Miami's in rough shape, boy.
They're where the Bills are, just with less infrastructure. They're where we are. They just don't have anything.
Yeah, they all started punching air when Tyreek Hill's like, JK, I'm going to come back. They're like, God damn it.
It's so funny if you think about the concept of the Miami Dolphins and where they stand, Chris. Chris, what do the Dolphins have that's better than what the Bills have? If you think about their roster, what do they have that's better than what we have?
The sun.
The sun. That's about all they have going for them. And at the same time, cap-wise, they're exactly where we are.
Yeah.
Now, their wide receiver core, I mean, I'm being glib, but you're talking about Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, which is awesome. But through two consecutive seasons, they've proven that Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill together do not make you a contender.
No.
Then they go, oh, well, it's a quarterback, and it's just because we don't have an offensive line. How are you going to pay for one?
Right.
You did pay for offensive linemen. You just paid the wrong one.
Yeah.
That's nobody else's fault but your own. You don't have any tight ends. You have a handful of defensive players that are pieces that are nice, but you've never been able to coordinate them. It's just hilarious watching what's going on over there. And one of the things that I find really interesting, the Bills have moves they have to make.
Absolutely. Yeah.
They've already started making them today. They cut Sam Martin. I almost, I started speculating in our group chat about whether or not what that means for Tyler Bass. Whether or not in the next 24 hours, we're not going to hear something about his future, because he could clear up another $3.4 million in cap space if they decide that's a move they want to make. I mean, new special teams coordinator.
Yeah, we talked about that the last time I was on, going back to it, right? Like, new special teams coordinator. Does this mean a new special teams core, right? We talked about Martin. We talked about Bass. We talked about Reed Ferguson, who's also an unrestricted free agent. Like, there's a lot of dominoes that still need to fall. Quentin Morris, right? Like a big special teamer. Reggie Gilliam is a big special team guy. Mac Hollins. Like, you could see an entire new special teams unit for Buffalo this year from a name perspective.
Sure. One thing I find really interesting about all this, though, as we go through all this turnover, is that even with all those, like, they have some pretty straightforward avenues to clearing up about $25 to $27 million in cap space without having to do anything crazy.
Yeah, there's easy levers to pull. Yeah.
Easy. And part of that flexibility comes from void years or the lack thereof. And that's one of the things that I look at when I think about the defensive free agency period this time around and how Brandon Beane is going to try to approach this. I think about void years. And, I've heard, I actually cringed because I'd started putting my notes together on this. And then I heard the guys on the morning radio show over at WGR do like a hack job of trying to explain what I'm about to expand on. And I was like, God, I could call, but then I'm that guy.
Yeah.
And Chris,
you're the well actually guy.
Chris, well, exactly. And you're that guy, and I hate that guy.
Yeah. I am in the
You're
chat.
usually that guy. When you look at the way void years have piled up around the NFL, the Super Bowl winning Eagles were in the deep end of the swimming pool with $340 million worth of void years as of the end of the 2024 season on their books. That's almost a third over the cap. That's 1/3 of the salary cap stacked on top of the existing salary cap. It's crazy. And then when you go down the list of other teams, right? Like, there's a lot up there. Do you think Howie Roseman is going to complain about how hard his job is after he did that to himself when he won a Super Bowl in the process?
No.
Do you think Eagles fans are going to complain about the Super Bowl that they won when they had all this void money out there and, oh man, it made our lives difficult for 4 years? No one cares.
You want to talk, actually, while we're on the Eagles, do you want to talk about a team that really lucked out? Do you remember, Chris? You might remember. Do you remember who Howie Roseman lost his GM job to?
Chip Kelly.
Remember that?
Oh my God.
Remember when Chip Kelly came in to be the head coach and he said, I want personnel control? They had Howie Roseman as the GM.
And he immediately traded away LaShawn McCoy.
Yeah, and they demoted Howie Roseman, and they could have lost Howie Roseman for that, right? Like, he could have gone anywhere else. Instead, he stuck around. I mean, Howie Roseman probably deserves a statue in Philadelphia by this point in time.
Well, and there's another thing of that, though, and that's where it's interesting.
Right next to Rocky. Yeah, maybe in front of him.
And I think we're going to learn a lot about Terry Pagula in the process of this, because he has an owner who's willing to just spend. He doesn't care about the guaranteed money. He doesn't care about what it costs him. It's his money.
Go win.
Yeah. I want to win. So I'm going to let you, whatever salary cap things you got to do, blah, 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 play within the rules. But if there's guaranteed money that I have to put in escrow, I don't give a shit. I want to win.
Yeah.
And that's what you watched them do. And so it worked for them. If you look at the guys who it didn't work out for, who are on this list ahead of Buffalo, because Buffalo ranks 16th in the NFL as the end of the 2024 season in void years. Middle of the pack for a team that made their championship game.
Yeah.
The teams ahead of them, it's like either you're a team that went for it in recent years, or you're the Saints. Because Ricky Loomis just, all this talk about the salary cap.
Trading for Derek Carr wasn't going for it?
It's hilarious just the way the Saints have fucked their salary cap to the point where it's like Chernobyl. I don't know if it'll ever be okay again.
Build a bubble.
You might as well just wall it off. The Jaguars get a lot of crap from people, but they have more playoff wins in the last decade than the Dolphins do. And they're ranked 5th and 7th in void years that they've taken on as part of these contracts that they've signed.
Fun fact, actually, just as we started recording, Jaguars released Evan Ingram.
See? Because they're figuring out, like, all right.
Traded Christian Kirk.
We made a run, and now it's more.
They traded Christian Kirk, paid the wrong guy. Let's get rid of him. Evan Ingram, we know we're not going to be able to afford him. Let's get rid of him.
Yep. The Lions and 49ers, two teams who had legitimate shots at Super Bowls over the last couple of years.
The 49ers, who also, by the way, have to figure out what they're going to do at quarterback.
Yep.
Because Purdy, $50 million, like he's going to let Darnold set the market, right? And it's going to be put up or shut up for the San Francisco 49ers. They're either going to have to finally admit that Purdy's not that good, or they're going to have to pay him like he's better than he is.
Meanwhile, the Ravens are 11th. And they're a handful of plays away from going to their first Super Bowl with Lamar Jackson. So it's just the idea, right? Like, and then you look at the Bills and how we've approached it. We've never gone for it in that way.
Right.
Amassing a ton of void years is something Beane has been able to put together really highly competitive rosters without having to do. I mean, I snickered when I saw the breakout today of Khalil Shakir's contract and how the cap hits are kind of laid out. And then in 2030, there's a void year. Hold on to your butts, everybody. $1.8 million. Really?
Yeah.
You put a void year in place for 1.8?
Yeah.
What are you doing? Like, you're dipping your toe in the water. I'm sorry. It just bothers me where it's like, here's Beane like, oh, watch me do this bad thing.
Yeah. He can't help himself.
He's conservative, and that's okay.
Yeah.
I think him and Sean McDermott share that in terms of their personality. They do get somewhat conservative. Not to say that Beane hasn't made trades or that he hasn't been aggressive
and they've positioned themselves
selectively.
They positioned themselves well from a salary cap perspective, right? Because they've got $11.5 million in dead money this year, and they have no dead money on the books after this season. So, I mean, they've done a good job of getting out from under, I think, what people would describe as bad contracts, right?
Yeah.
Like that Trey White contract after his additional injury, that was going to be a bad contract. And instead of fighting through it, you know, they got what they could for him and they shipped them off. Stephon Diggs, that looked like a pretty bad contract. You know, if they were truly going to go the direction they went this past season, that was going to be a bad contract. He wasn't going to be happy, right? They weren't going to be as productive with him not being happy. They trade him away. They get something for him. Bills fans hated it, but they traded him away. They got this year where they got to eat. I think it's like $3.8 million, something like that, of left of his contract. And he's going to be lucky if he can find a team this offseason, right? Like they've done a really good job of getting out. And their biggest dead money right now is Rasul Douglas, which again looked like it worked. Like that was one where it worked, and he's kind of reached his cap. And they've got a stud in Benford that can hold down CB1. And they're like, hey, thanks for your service, Rasul. Like, see ya. And we talked about that for how many years you want to be what the Patriots used to be, right? I'd rather get rid of a guy a year early than be a year late and be stuck under a bad contract. So they've done a really good job of positioning themselves with the void years, and then just kind of sucking it up last season and saying we're going to eat a lot of this dead money. We're not going to restructure the guys we should have restructured last year to get cap space, because now we've got those levers to pull this year.
Yep.
And next year we don't have any dead money on the books. It makes it a lot easier.
And so in that way, Beane has been able to navigate these waters, putting together really competitive football teams year in, year out. But at a certain point, you got to dance, right?
Yeah.
Like at a certain point, you got to go for it.
Right.
And so like there's tools there now, though, to your point. He's created the space for him to, at the back end of Josh Allen's career, be aggressive.
Yep.
The tools and the cap space and the trade, like the trade assets there in terms of draft capital, it's all there for him. And now the thing is, there's multiple ways to skin a cat. And the question becomes, how does he go about like attacking this? Because the way that he handles the next, I'd say, 2 off seasons and the on-field results are kind of going to be what defines his career as a whole.
Yeah.
So when you take a look at what the Buffalo Bills need, right? The sexy position to address, especially after the Super Bowl, pass rush.
Yep.
It's the thing. Everybody wants one. everybody who doesn't have a great one wants a great one.
Yep.
And everybody who thinks that they have a great quarterback wants one even worse. There's also sneaky needs in the secondary. You look at cornerback, you look at safety. Safety could use an upgrade.
For sure.
Especially with Damar Hamlin being a free agent and just changing agents recently, which tells you he wasn't liking what he was hearing from his current agent. He wants somebody who's going to be more aggressive and try to drum up an offer.
Yeah. And I don't think Hamlin was done any favors the last couple seasons in Buffalo either, because they made him feel like he's a starting caliber NFL safety. And I'm not sure that there's many teams that agree with that. So I'm sure he's out there looking for starter money right now. And I think you're going to see Damar Hamlin fall into a very similar situation as Dane Jackson did, where Dane Jackson thought he was a better player than he was. And the system made him really, really good. So he held out. He goes to Carolina for a good payday. Good for him. Hey, go be that dude. But then when he's not that dude, they release him a year later. Right. And Hamlin's probably going to be in that similar situation.
Alabama cornerback, undrafted free agent.
Levi Wallace.
I ran into him at the airport. He's another one who did the exact same thing, where you're a member of a secondary in a scheme that fits specifically what you do well. And it doesn't even matter. It doesn't even matter if you're performing at a high level. You're serviceable in terms of the NFL.
Yep.
And if you were to leave the safe haven of that system, it's dicey.
Yeah.
If you're a 7th round, 6th round undrafted free agent player, the odds are the team that selected you or gave you an offer and asked you to be a part of their team did so not because they think you're a premier talent or a great athlete or anything else, because otherwise they would have drafted you 3 rounds ago.
Yeah.
The conversation becomes, I think I do a thing and you might fit that thing someday.
Yeah.
And I'd like to see what that looks like in my building.
Yep.
These are dart throw picks that you find a GM who's going to lament a 7th round pick. You're not going to find one.
Right.
They don't care.
Right. And also you've got a head coach who now has a track record of Micah Hyde, Jordan Poyer, Rasul Douglas, Dane Jackson, Teron Johnson, like name after name of these guys where it's like, well, Christian Benford is another one. Bring these guys in. My scheme, my system will elevate the player above where his skill set is. Micah Hyde, again, Hyde, Poyer, Douglas, they were all cast-offs from their teams, right? Benford, Johnson, Jackson, they were all low-round picks. Jamarcus Ingram is another one that they're trying to turn. Saran Neal, like the list goes on and on with McDermott. So at a certain point, you wonder one of two things. One, our team's going to pick up on it and say these guys that Buffalo's letting walk away probably aren't worth us overspending on them, or do they continue to say, well, Dane Jackson didn't work out, but this next guy will, so it'll be interesting to see what that does. But I mean, it's McDermott. I mean, it's absolutely McDermott's system. It's McDermott's scheme. It's that position is elevated by the scheme that he plays. And these guys are going out into the open market. And it's very telling when a team like Buffalo, who's got the holes in the secondary they have, are like, sorry, Damar, like go get a deal. Like, good luck.
Yeah.
And they did that with Poyer, right? They brought him back when they had Rapp, because they wanted Rapp. They didn't want Poyer, but they had already said, go find a deal if we'll match it.
I think his contract was $1.6 million.
Here's our offer. If you can find a better one, good luck to you. If not, come back. And he came back, and they were like, well, God damn it. So I mean, I think that's going to be the trend now for these teams.
It's entirely possible. Chris, do me a favor. Up on the screen here in front of Ryan and I, can you give me the 2025 NFL free agent on Spotrac, just the free agent tracker? And I want you to filter that for undrafted free agent players. And here's where I want you to start. Go down and pick the edge position, because it's where we have to
unrestricted free agents.
Unrestricted free agents, UFAs.
Yep.
So here's where I want to start this conversation, right? Resource allocation when it comes to building a roster is important. And it's one of the things that fans lose sight of, especially the ones who find the time to call WGR and opine about things, and it just drives me crazy. It's this concept that if you put all your eggs in one basket, you cannot bitch as a fan about the fact that there aren't eggs in any of the other baskets.
Yeah.
And that's a thing that I struggle with when it comes to how do we obtain a pass rush upgrade for 2025. There's multiple avenues, but which one makes the most sense? you've got the trade, you've got drafting, and you've got free agency. And I don't know if there's a right answer. I think there's things to consider, right? Like, first of all, I hate on principle paying two ways for the same thing. I don't want to give up. Like, if I have to go get better, we got Von Miller, improved our pass rush, and we gave up a ton of cap space. Okay, I'll celebrate that. If we, people who trade up, the Texans trade up so they can get Will Anderson. You gave up draft capital. I struggle with the concept of giving up draft picks and cap space because that makes it harder to build around this entire thing.
Sure.
But at the same time, when you have what we have on offense, I guess you could make an exception and you could justify it if you're a handful of teams in the NFL. If you're the Kansas City Chiefs, the Buffalo Bills, like, who are some of the other teams you think could get away with that?
Probably Baltimore, Philadelphia.
Okay.
Well, I mean, with Philadelphia's cap situation right now, who knows? Probably Detroit, I think. You're going to have to replace Goff at some point. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't even say Minnesota. Like, Minnesota's got to make a decision at quarterback, right? Are they going to ride? Are they going to give the reins to the rookie? Are they going to re-sign Darnold? It sounds like if they re-sign Darnold, McCarthy's going to ask out. So that creates a whole other issue.
The Commanders might be able to do it. The
Commanders now, especially after the trade that acquired Debo, like, they may be tooled up, right? Mm-hmm. So I mean, aside from really the Commanders, it's teams that have an established quarterback and have shown that they can get to the place where you got to get to the next step. Right?
So that's why this trade market conversation is so interesting to me. Because,
like, is even Houston in that category? I don't think so.
No, and
not with Stroud.
Well, and so what they did was they went out and got Danielle Hunter last year. Mm-hmm. They spent cap space to go get a guy who's very good at what he does.
Well, but the error there is, to your point, right? Like, if you've got what you've got on offense, you can go and get that guy, right? You can go and get that difference maker on defense. The problem is, they made the assessment that they had the guy at quarterback,
and right? They also thought they had enough on offense,
right? And now the question
on offense,
is,
it dried up on them.
Yeah, and now the question is, do they have the guy at quarterback?
Yeah,
because Stroud took such a massive step backwards.
So when I think about the trade market in general for these pass rushers, that's going to be Chris. Chris, you understand how this is going to be the conversation that carries the next 10, 15 days for Bills fans. The number of teams who can reasonably make one of these swings is pretty small.
Yeah.
Like, the list is small, and it gets smaller when you start looking at their cap situation and what draft picks they have available, what their other positions look like. So with that said, I think that if the Bills wanted to get into these waters, they absolutely could. And there isn't a whole lot of, there's no bidding war.
Right.
It's, I'm going to give you my best and final. You see if you as the team giving up a Myles Garrett can live with that. Mm-hmm. Now, Andrew Berry is doing what every smart GM should do. And he's digging his heels in. Now, you can laugh at him, right? Because he's a part of the whole Deshaun Watson fiasco, which is part of the reason this entire conversation is happening.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, he's doing the best he can. And I respect that because he's saying, look, here's a generational talent that will be a first ballot Hall of Famer. I can't get fleeced in a trade for this, or else they'll run me out of town.
Yeah.
So he's holding out until somebody wows him. And I get it. I understand. And
they're holding out. I think what's going on is they're holding out to call Garrett's bluff.
Sure.
Because he says he's not coming, right? And when you hear, kind of the talking heads and say, well, by all accounts, everything that we heard at the combine was the Browns have zero interest. They're not trading him. They're not even listening to offers at this point in time. All of that shapes up to, all right, Myles, you say you don't want to be here. You've turned down our contract extensions. Why don't you just sit out then, right? And let's see how many hits to your pocketbook. Now, does that turn into a Hassan Reddick situation where he held out and he finally got his way and got traded? Or does that turn into a situation where Garrett's like, I can't continue to lose this kind of money. I guess I'll come back and play out the length of my extension. But then he opens himself up to the franchise tag in 2 seasons. And
so then there's you look around, right? Because then there's other guys out there Max Crosby was supposed to be one of these guys until he got the fattest of contracts.
Yeah.
Chris, $91 million guaranteed on a $110 million deal. It's almost completely guaranteed.
That's insane for DN.
He's now the highest by annual value non-quarterback in the NFL.
And I think he's worth it.
Oh, sure. Because he plays every snap.
Also, the Raiders aren't paying anyone else.
Who else are they going to pay, right?
They're not paying him. Why they have the second most cap space in the NFL.
And let's be realistic. You look at Crosby, he screams Raiders, right?
Yes.
Like, he screams Raiders. And he plays 100% of snaps. Like, he's not a rotational defensive end.
I also like that he screams fuck Patrick Mahomes.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that he hates that guy, and I like that he's staying in that division. But Trey Hendrickson's out there, right? And today, granted permission to seek a trade. That's going to actually increase. You want to know why? Because if you look at the list of cut candidates, for reasons that we're going to talk about during tonight's live show, those of you who've already seen it, great. You already know what I'm about to say. Appreciate you. But also, for those of you who haven't, go check it out because we're going to talk about the dynamics that drive why the trade market this year is actually going to be more impactful probably than free agency.
I think the telling thing about Hendrickson, too, is not only was he granted permission to go seek a trade, he made the statement like he's leaving.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Like
he made
put out that
well in
statement
advance.
to say thanks for Cincinnati. It was an honor, blah, blah, blah. Like, he's gone.
But also, they already cut Sheldon Rankins.
Sure.
And Sam Hubbard is still out there, who is another, I wouldn't say he's a star, but he's another Dan who's going to get cut. You look at the list of names that aren't getting the headlines that are probably available if you wanted one of them. There's a Sam Hubbard, a Harold Landry, a Jonathan Allen, who by all accounts is going to get cut and be available to the highest bidder. If you're a team that thinks you can Chris, what's that term you use? Refuculate?
Refuculate.
If you can recalculate this,
A reclamation project
on a guy's career, and you can renegotiate and rework that contract that sucks on paper.
That's adding some void years.
That's worth a seventh round pick.
Sure.
They're floating it now because they hope someone does what just happened with Christian Kirk, where someone traded for him knowing he was going to get cut, and they said, "Well, shit, we don't think we can negotiate directly with him. We'll just trade for him."
Yeah. Yeah. So, his current deal fits his market value doesn't. So let's just trade for him, right? And the trade market, Joe Thuney just went for a 4th round pick.
Yeah.
Right. He's an all pro, older, but an all pro.
Yep.
Who just got to the Super Bowl, was a revelation for the Chiefs, who were in desperate need of offensive line help.
He became a left tackle out of nowhere and just did it better than anyone else on the
he just went
roster.
for a 4th. So what does that mean for the trade market of other positions? Because left tackle is pretty goddamn important in the NFL.
When you think about like Harold Landry, 28 years old, I look at this, three double-digit sack seasons in a row. But you wonder how much of that's luck. Like his pass rush win rate is like one of the worst in the NFL. He's in the 3rd percentile of the entire NFL. And then it's like, so maybe this guy is a threat to regress, and you'd be smart if you're the Titans to move on. Well, then what's your market? Because if again, I make the statement all the time, if an idiot with beer and Google can find these things out, I guarantee you GMs know that.
For sure.
So the offer you're going to get for a Harold Landry, probably not going to blow you out of the water.
No.
And so in that way, there's a guy out there, though, who's probably going to get cut if he doesn't get traded.
Yeah.
And if they can swing it, maybe some team out there says, hey, I can take him and rework his contract and make that guy work versus having to bid for him in free agency.
Sure.
And that's what this has become. But there are options. Some are going to break the bank. Some won't. In terms of Chris, the Myles Garrett trade, I want to hear it from the lay fan. How much would you be comfortable with the Bills giving up to get Myles Garrett sitting right here, right now, today?
You're going to have to give up at least, for me, picks, 1 first-round pick. That's all you get.
I was going to say, what's the trade that would make you angry?
Multiple firsts.
Okay. Now, Ryan, I think we're both in agreement it would probably take something of that nature to get Andrew Berry to move, right?
Yeah, I think the conversation for Andrew Berry starts at 2 firsts.
Yep.
If I'm Myles, because the argument that I would make if I'm Andrew Berry is I've got him under contract for 2 more years. Mm-hmm. So if you give me this year's first and next year's first, you don't need to worry about using one of those first on a defensive end.
Yeah.
That's my starting point for Andrew Berry. From there, the conversation then goes to, okay, well, can we talk to his agent then? Like, we're okay with the 2 firsts. Can we have the conversation with his agent? And then from there, it's what's an extension look like? What's he realistically looking like for an extension? Does he want one now? Is he willing to take a pay cut this year to get a long-term deal?
How much money are you, as the dirtbag Browns, who you're not going to be competitive? How much money are you willing to keep?
Yeah.
And then the question is, okay, well, we couldn't work out a huge deal. The money's a problem. And then you're Andrew Berry, and you come back and go, I don't know, if you throw in an extra third, I'll eat half his salary.
Sure.
And he can save his image as a GM by how he plays this.
Yeah. I mean, because what's he got to lose? Because I think it was in the group chat today. I want to say the group chat that you and I are in. They're going to owe Watson isn't it something like $82 million like next season to the season after?
$82 million next year, so they're going to have to rework his deal again.
And there is no way, this is, his contract is not a normal contract.
It's the worst.
It was all guaranteed money. There is no creative accounting that can be done that will lessen that cap hit.
You're going to have to extend him,
even if you
to shove the money on down the road.
Even if you kick the money down the road, it doesn't go away. No. It just gets bigger in the final year. So instead of owing him $82 million next year, you're going to owe him $95 million in 2 years, right? Like, at some point, you're going to have to bite the bullet. So why not eat the money for Garrett, eat the money for Watson in the same season, get 2 firsts and a third, or 2 firsts and a fourth, from a team like the Bills, who are going to be drafting bottom third,
perpetually, forever,
a higher, somewhere in the 26 to 32 range for the next few seasons, and get out from under it. Right. Yep. Like, at some point, you've got to just bite the bullet and say, we got to get out from under this.
Now, I'm happy you brought up the draft, because that's a thing that I know people listening to this are going to go, well, Brandon Beane, he did it before. And he's like, no, he did. He went out and gave up cap and picks for Stephon Diggs, and it had a transformative effect on this team. Right? That was back in 2020. What I will say is that you're entering a year with the draft where it's being talked about as one of the best in recent history for defensive line talent.
Yeah.
And so, thinking about this, I went back to the 2021 draft, which was a mistake. Like, I had a beer in my hand when I did it, and I went and got a second one because I was so engrossed in it. I was like, oh my God. Who let this happen? Chris, let me recap the 2021 draft for you from the top. Quarterbacks, Trevor Lawrence, Zach Wilson, and Trey Lance went 1, 2, and 3. That's your top 3 in the draft. Kyle Pitts went number 4.
Yeah.
Kyle Pitts number 4. So far, this draft is a dog. You took Kyle Pitts ahead of Penei Sewell, Chase, Jamar Chase, Jalen Waddle, and Devonta Smith. I would have, if I'm Arthur Blank, 3 years down the road, I take that guy outside the dumpsters at a casino in Atlanta, and I have him shot. The Raiders took offensive tackle Alex Leatherwood ahead of Minnesota's Christian Darrisaw.
Yeah.
Hilarious. Yeah. Like, what are we talking about? There's a lot of disgusting to that draft. But when you look at the way the board fell for defensive line, if you remember, that was the year we took Greg Rousseau.
Yep.
Micah Parsons, maybe the second most dominant pass rush threat in the NFL behind Myles Garrett. First defensive lineman to go at pick 12. 12. Mm-hmm. You're already into double digits when the best pass rusher that we'll have seen get drafted and play, like one of the top 5, got picked. Despite injury red flags, Miami takes Jalen Phillips at 18. He's pretty good when he's healthy. Yeah. But he's pretty good.
Yeah.
And he's fairly consistent, like, in terms of his win rate, in terms of his sacks, in terms of quarterback hits. By the time you got down the board to where the Bills were picking, you see multiple teams have the same idea. I'm just going to take a guy who I think fits my system. Mm-hmm. It's almost like what we were just talking about with cornerbacks. Kwity Paye at number 21 for Indy. Buffalo gets Greg Rousseau at 30. The next 2 picks behind them, Baltimore takes his name Odafe Oweh now, and Joe Tryon. Out of that group, Greg Rousseau's the high watermark.
Yeah. Yep.
He's the best of the late group.
Well, and remember why he fell too, because he had that injury in college.
Yeah.
So they were questioning, how healthy is he, and yeah.
But you look at that.
He also sat out for COVID.
Yeah.
But so you look at that and you say to yourself, we got the best of the second tier And they're not even on the same planet as the guy above him, who's not on the same planet as the guy above him, who got drafted in like the late single digits, early double digits.
Yep.
So when I think about that, and I got to grab a fresh beer for this. Ryan, would you like one?
Always.
Give him a winter warmer.
I'm not going to do that to him. What I'm going to do is I'm going to hit him with a cream.
Oh, screamer. Screamer time, Chris.
What if instead of going big game hunting this year, Brandon Beane decided to take that aggression and make a real big swing and do it in the draft? If you said to yourself, hey, I love it, because you know Brandon Beane and he's cap conscious. It's what he does. It's baked into it's why we've been consecutively competitive. Without, like, this was supposed to be the rebuilding year, and we were still a better team because we still had the space to pay the guys we had to pay. We've had to hemorrhage talent, but it was always designed hemorrhaging, not, oh my God, I don't know. It's not the Bengals where they're like, Trey Hendrickson's great, but we can't afford him because we didn't build this thing properly. We didn't time our salary cap hits right. Beane will never allow that to happen, it feels like. And so in that way, I take a look at it and say, what if you just instead decided to get aggressive and say, I'll go in the draft and get aggressive with that draft capital and go try to get me the next Micah Parsons? It's entirely possible.
Sure.
You know, and this is what I hate about people who talk about trades and who if you call the radio station and try to prognosticate a trade in the draft, you should be dragged outside of a casino in Atlanta and shot in front of Arthur Blank.
And
like Joe Pesci.
Like Joe Pesci.
Made to dig your own grave.
Yes. I sat there and I used this tool that everybody does. They go to overthecap.com and they go, well, let me use a trade calculator because it's the Fitzgerald Spielberg model.
Which has replaced the Jimmy Johnson mark, right?
No one cares. It doesn't matter. You can put them all in
It feels like you're talking to a very specific portion of the Bills podcast community.
You could pack all of these guys, the people who subscribe to it and try to use it to talk about on stupid podcasts, the guys who created the calculators, the guys who did the math to create the calculators.
Actually, you know.
You put them all in 55-gallon drums and you drop them out in the middle of the Gulf of America. That's what you do.
Gulf of America. At least someone's using it, goddammit.
You go
Egg prices are $10 a dozen. You better start using the Gulf of America.
So it's just this thing, right? It would take the Bills by all these stupid calculations, a first this year, a second the next day, and a 2026 like day 3 pick to make a trade advantageous for the receiving team. Whether it's the Saints, whether it's the Panthers, whether it's anybody else, to trade back and allow us to trade up in a pick anywhere 8 to 12. And in there will be pass rush down. And so the idea is it's not like, doesn't that cost less than the Myles Garrett idea?
Yeah.
And hey, I could go land the next guy who, by the way, is going to keep me cap solvent for a while and has cap hits that are predictable, and I can work around this.
Yeah, I mean, you're also hoping to get the next guy instead of getting the guy.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I'm giving up a first, a second, and a next year day 3 pick for maybe the next Myles Garrett.
Mm-hmm.
Or I can give up 2 firsts and a third in the hypothetical situation we threw out there and sign the Myles Garrett. The Myles Garrett, who will be the Myles Garrett for about 4 to 5 more seasons. Oh, I don't think you get that far much out of him. No, I don't think Myles Garrett. I jumped into a conversation that Nate Geary was having on Twitter. I'm not necessarily a Myles Garrett guy at this point. I just feel like you look at the Khalil Mack trade that back when it happened when he went to the Chargers, and I think that's kind of he was around the same age, right? He had one really good season for the Chargers, and then he did a lot of nothing until last season when he had kind of his rebirth, at the age of 34 years old, right? Like, I struggle with the amount that you'd have to give up to get a Garrett, in that you can give up less for Hendrickson, and at worst for Hendrickson, you're getting, 15 sacks.
Sure.
16 sacks.
Well, that's it. You can book it down. And then I look at this and I go, how about Michael Williams out of Georgia? Comes with a pedigree, seems to fit the physical mold of what the Bills want to do in terms of player archetype. What do I want in a D end? Like, a lot of people are basically saying like his comp by scouts is like, oh, he's built like Greg Rousseau. He plays the run like, I've seen it from multiple people. Plays the run like NFL player Greg Rousseau, just with more bend and athleticism in terms of pass rush. Isn't that what we've wanted?
Mm-hmm.
So you could, in theory, considering where people seem to see him in the hierarchy of defensive ends, there's a real opportunity that if no one in that, a lot of the non-competitive teams, the Saints, the Panthers, who might be willing to divest at that point, if that guy's on the board, you could overpay a little bit and go get a guy like that and then feel good about what the direction of that position is going forward, knowing you still didn't pay as much as a Myles Garrett. Now, I know this is a scratch-off ticket. He could be a bust. He could be terrible in the NFL, which is why you balance it out with the UFA market, because you know what you didn't spend using all that aggression with picks is cap space.
Yep.
And you still have cap. So I can go out there and I say, hey, you know what I could do is I could use some creative accounting and I could go get one of the better players out there on the edge market. Now, when I look at this thing sucks.
Yeah. It's like the wide receiver market.
It's old and it's pared down. And this is a symptom of a rising salary cap, like we talked about, and just other dynamics that we talked about in the live show. But the thing I look at is a Hassan Reddick. That's the guy that stands out to me, because I go, here's a guy, when you think about what he is, right? And you think about what he brings to the table, 4 consecutive years of double-digit sacks, and then he goes to play for the shitbag Jets. If you were to do the aggressive trade up in the draft, you would have no choice but to get a real solution in place behind them.
Yeah.
Not doing so is the equivalent of what the Bills did in 2023 when they brought in Floyd, who did well.
Yeah.
Just not as well as it would have gone if you hadn't had the ghost of Von Miller playing the other edge position on passing downs.
Yeah.
If you had had an explosive rookie or a rookie with upside or a player with upside on the other side of him, who isn't Greg Rousseau, you would have had a rotation there that would have really been able to do some damage. You would have been able to build legitimate NASCAR packages where guys can win on the inside with just size and speed. Mm-hmm. It's that type of stuff where I say there's a lot to be excited about. And there's a lot for Brandon Beane to figure out here. It's just, how aggressive does he feel like being?
Yeah, I mean, when you look at
what I'm proposing is the most conservative path to that, I think.
Yeah, I mean, when you're looking at this list, there's 2 guys that stand out to me, at least, as these are guys that are like first, like pass rusher 1, right? That's Reddick and Sweat. Mm-hmm. Those are the 2 guys that are, everyone
I hate this market.
Yeah, everyone else on this list, at best, everyone else on this list is a secondary pass rusher. You're hoping that, like a Bosa, right? Like Joey Bosa, when you think about Joey Bosa, it doesn't feel like it feels like he's older than he is. Mm-hmm. He's not 30 yet, right? Like, that's a little surprising to me when I hear Joey Bosa's name. Mm-hmm. I think that he's over the hill because he's had some injury history in the last few seasons, especially with that foot that he had last year, right?
It's putting it lightly.
Yeah. But
some injury history. Hang on. Saying that Joey Bosa has some injury history is akin to saying my teeth are a little messed up.
But could you see Joey Bosa going the Leonard Floyd route where it's like, I'm just going to, or a, one of those guys is just a mercenary, right? Bring me in, give me $10 million a year, put me in the right packages. I'll go get you double-digit sacks.
Understandable.
Hey, the fuck happened to Chase Young?
Yo, look at Chase Young. Like, if you were to say 2 years ago, Chris, hey, in 2 seasons you're going to be able to go get a 26-year-old Chase Young for $4 million a year, like.
Not if you ask Spotrac. Spotrac thinks he's getting 17. Chris, click that market value link. Open it in a separate tab just so we don't lose the screen. It's hilarious. Watch that. 17.5. Yeah. They think he's getting 17. That's why you can't trust Spotrac's
Yeah.
It's like PFF. Give me the data. Don't give me your prognostications and your analysis because you suck.
Yeah.
Here's what I don't love in terms of defensive tackle and defensive end when you look at the markets. Defensive end, everything out here, everybody on this list is a defensive end or edge player free agent has significant age, durability issues. Some of them have both, right? Defensive tackle, 11 of the top 17 players at D tackle are going to be 29 or older when the season starts. There's a small group of younger players like Milton Williams who are going to drive the market, but only 3 defensive tackles crack any top 50 list of any major like sports outlet. It's just not a great time to be trying to use just the undrafted free agent pool to fix your defensive line. It's not. Yeah. You can't do it with this class.
Yeah.
There's nobody out there. And if you try, it's going to blow up in your face. And so in that way, I think that there are a lot of really intriguing options because that's, Chris, can we say it? Defensive line is all anybody cares about in defensive free agency this year.
Correct.
And there are a lot of different avenues the Bills can take over the next week and over the next month and a half, 2 months to fix their pass rush, or at least weaponize it. Make it an asset to your team instead of just a thing you're hoping works out. I just don't know if Brandon Beane has, the question comes down to what does he have the stomach for?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you talk about like what should be the focus in this free agent class defensively, I mean, I think you could make the argument that they treat this year's pass rush class in the draft or defensive line talent in the draft similar to what they did last year at the wide receiver market, where we're going to go get. Last year it was a deep wide receiver class. This year it's a deep defensive line class. Like we're going to go in free agency and we're going to spend for a corner because we've got to replace Rasul Douglas. They got nobody on the roster unless you're going to
talk about that before we end the show.
Yeah, we're going to have to go get at least one safety. We're probably going to have to go get a linebacker, right? And then we're going to go into the draft and either be aggressive or we feel comfortable about the guys that are there by the time we're ready to pick that. As much as I'm sure Bills fans would hate it, trade back again and try to, it didn't work out great with Keon Coleman last year. But maybe that's the approach that's the blueprint that they've used recently, at least.
And I guess that's the thing is, if you're ever going to, you did the reset, there's a reason that you reset things. Your quarterback is league MVP. It's never going to get better than this. No. And there is never going to, like we talked about at the top of the show, there's never going to be another window where you have an opportunity to go be reckless a little bit and take the shots that are necessary to take. Join the Eagles in, hey, I'm going to go for broke here, literally and figuratively. But if it gets me a Lombardi, no one's going to care.
Yeah.
There will be a statue of me outside.
Yeah, I think the question that's worth asking is, if not now, when?
Exactly.
Right? Like if you're not going to do it now, if you're not going to go for it now, you give Josh the extension that he's deserved.
Rage Against the Machine. Better time than here.
Right. He's not going to, Josh isn't going to get cheaper.
Than here, right? Better time than now.
Like Josh isn't going to get cheaper because these other deals are going to start to come up. These rookies are going to come up with their, Jaden Daniels is going to need a contract in a couple seasons. Lamar is going to be ready for a new deal here in a couple seasons. Patrick Mahomes is Josh isn't going to get cheaper. So the question that you've got to ask if you're Brandon Beane is, do I re-up Josh now or do I restructure him and take a crack at it? Because if I'm not going to take a crack at it, what are we doing here?
The player won't fault you for doing it.
No.
The player will never fault you for doing it.
And especially if Brandon goes to Josh, it's like, Josh, listen, let's restructure. Give me 1 year.
How bad do you want to hoist that Lombardi?
Give me 1 year.
I promise I'll make it. I promise I'll make it right.
We're going for it, and here's my plan to go for it. Give me a season. Restructure your deal. Talk the other guys into restructuring, quiet leader type of thing. I will take care of you on the back end, but we've got to take a shot at this now.
Now, players we think are interesting outside of the pass rush department. You hit on it. Cornerback. Cornerback is a need where I don't think, especially if you're talking about being aggressive in any of the ways we're talking about it, and you know that if you're spending that first round draft pick in a class that's filled with great defensive tackles and great defensive ends, you're probably not drafting a cornerback in the first round.
No.
If they do, Chris, Seagram's bet, I'm willing to make it right now. The Bills will not draft a cornerback with their first pick.
I would agree with that.
Okay. You look at what's out there, and there's just enough that could get you by for a year, maybe two.
With this scheme, you don't need a top flight guy.
No.
Right?
And you look at the guys who have just been told they're going to be made available, but who also might be available via trade before they get a chance to get cut the same way Christian Kirk did. There's a James Bradbury. There's a Darius Slay. There's a Mike Hilton. You know, I don't love the idea of either 30-year-old Kendall Fuller or Rasul Douglas. I didn't want Douglas back. Kendall Fuller is kind of a Rasul Douglas.
Yeah.
You know, he on paper, it all looks really good. You go back and watch some of those games, and I saw a lot of the backs of guys' jerseys, and luckily quarterbacks didn't. It was almost like Kyrie Elam in the second half of that Chiefs game.
Yeah.
Where everyone's like, oh, no, things kind of slowed down. No, they didn't. Mahomes just didn't go to those guys.
Right.
Otherwise, Kyrie Elam was laying on the ground while his responsibility was running across the field. Here's what I love about the cornerback position this offseason. Hashtag Sports Mario Granada has this giant conspiracy theory, guys. Let me sit you down. Let's bring you under the tent a little bit. Guys, let's get in here.
Huddle up.
Mario Granada believes that if the Buffalo Bills bring back Dane Jackson as a cornerback, it will underscore the fact that Sean McDermott has undermined Bobby Babich and is once again.
I remember. I'm remembering this conversation as you bring it up.
And I had to keep. I was like, no, go, man.
Yeah.
Keep telling me. It's like when you meet.
It's like that Jack Nicholson meme where he's just smiling and nodding.
Yeah, because I'm like, this is the craziest conversation I've ever. You've been thinking about this for a while. Let's get it out. Let's see what you think.
This is like flat Earth theory.
I love weird.
Yeah.
Nothing makes me happier than weird. And this is like when you meet the guy on the subway who's got tinfoil and he's crinkling it, and you go, hey man, what are you doing? And he goes, well, I'm doing this so that they don't get me. You're like, oh, now I have to know.
Yeah. Yeah.
He has a conspiracy theory that if Dane Jackson returns to the Buffalo Bills, it'll underscore the fact that Sean McDermott is once again butting in
taking charge of the defense.
In terms of coordinators' jobs, and that his inclusion on this roster would be kind of underscore like Sean McDermott will never change who Sean McDermott is. He can't let his underlings control things.
Yeah.
He won't give up his scheme, quote unquote, even though everything he's done this offseason and the previous season kind of speaks to the fact.
Yeah, I think Mario actually used the phrase "buckle up."
Buckle up, everybody. And all I can think of is that Sam Jackson in Jurassic Park. Hold on to your butts.
Yeah.
I kind of hope they sign Dane Jackson now just to see Mario melt down.
Yeah, I mean, again, we talked about Dane Jackson earlier in the show, forgetting the fact that he was pretty good for Buffalo, right? And just going, you know what? There's a guy on the market that I know can work in this system, right? I don't need to, I don't need to look at a DJ Reed and say, yeah, based on his skill set, I think I can make him work, right? Like I know Dane Jackson works in this system. I seen it. Right. So like that's the concept for me. And I know I said that back to Mario, where it was like, well, maybe they just see Dane Jackson as a guy who's played in this system before, and it would be nice to bring him back, set and forget at cornerback 2, and let me go shore up the rest of this defense. Right. But Mario disagreed with that take and decided that, like that it meant that Sean McDermott was meddling in things.
For those of you who are Javon Holland truthers, Sheena Quick, Panthers beat reporter, comes out and says Panthers and Titans among teams in mix for safety Javon Holland. I know I've seen that name floated around out here at safety. There are more, but these are the top 2, according to Cameron Wolf. His market should be upwards of $15 million a year.
Good God.
Why do you think Miami walked away? Miami was like, wait, what's your number? And they said, his representation sat down at the table and said, okay, we think we're worth $15 million. And they went, Chris Greer went, and he got up and just walked out of the room laughing. He didn't even send anybody to escort them out.
Yeah.
He just went back to his office.
They're sitting there and shut the lights off on his way out. They're just sitting there in the dark. So are we done? Like, do we go?
He goes, okay, we're having that conversation.
Oh, y'all are full on crazy.
I left. I got my keys and went home.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. They called Jeffy. Are you coming back to this meeting? Oh, I'm already home. I'm already home in my comfy pants.
I went down. He goes, you know what I did? He goes, I took some binoculars and I went down to Cape Canaveral. And they were like, why? He goes, no, because I was trying to. He's like, I was looking around, really searching to figure out who the fuck you think you're talking to.
I was looking high and low for your audacity, sir. I wanted to know where you got that audacity.
And this is where, like, the Bills do have needs in the secondary.
Sure, for sure.
Damar Hamlin, if the talk is, and obviously the market will prove it out next week, but it wouldn't shock me if teams saw what they saw from Javon Holland in 2021 and said, I could use that. A guy we like from formerly over at Cover One, Uber Hansen. Hansel kind of he pointed out the fact that, can you name 64 safeties in the NFL who are better than Damar Hamlin?
I can't name 64 safeties in the NFL.
The reality is he's starting for a reason. He's probably a reasonable starter.
Yeah, I mean, 64 is probably high. Like Damar Hamlin's not going to drop into the box.
No.
Right? Like, he's not a strong safety.
So, okay, but cut that in half.
Sure.
But also, there might be a team that doesn't care because they're in a rebuilding mode and they go, look, I need a body.
Yeah, and he's not a bad body because he comes with a story. He comes with fan engagement. He comes with, there's a lot of things. It's called in the business world, it's called goodwill.
Yes.
Right? And he certainly comes with goodwill.
So when you look at the safety position as a whole, like I hear people say what you said earlier, like, I'm going to need a linebacker, I'm going to need this, I'm going to need that. This isn't grocery shopping.
Right.
You have to take a look at, like, this is grocery shopping during COVID where you have to look around the shelves and go, hey, can I find peanut butter? Oh, cool, it's here today. Awesome. If not, all right, well, I guess everyone's going to have to get used to Nutella and fluff because that's what I got.
If you grocery shop at Aldi's, you could,
How dare you,
You kind of no, I mean, I love Aldi's.
I feel attacked.
I love Aldi's, but you go in there with a wish list, not a grocery list, right? You shop differently at Aldi's than you do at Wegmans because Wegmans, what's going to be there, right? Stores like Aldi's, Costco, like you go in there with like, man, it'd be really cool if they had this. And you get there and you're like, fuck, they're out of it. Or they don't have it in stock. I guess I'll have to go for something different. Maybe I'll swing by Wegmans on the way home.
Like the free agent Jordan Poyer's out there.
No, hard pass.
Hang on. Look at this. Tony Jefferson, Quandre Diggs. When you take a look at the guys who are still out there, Justin Reed's going to be available. He's 28. He might be the best and brightest that the field has to offer. And the Chiefs won't keep him because they can't afford him.
Yeah, I mean, I think don't forget about Buffalo, though, right? When you talk about the safety position, don't forget about Buffalo that they aren't necessarily, they're addressing safety different than they need to address those other positions I talked about. Sure. Corner, pass rusher, defensive line, linebacker, because they've got a kid that they drafted last year that they think is worthy of a second round pick.
But is he a free safety or is he a strong safety?
Doesn't matter. They've got Rap that can play both.
For how long?
I mean, but when it comes to McDermott, right? Like that's irrelevant, right? Because they took Micah Hyde, who dropped into the box, right, for Green Bay by and large, and they made him. They were like,
he was a slot corner.
Yeah,
he was a nickel corner,
and they said you're going to play free safety, right? Yeah. And they took Jordan Poyer, who had been a free safety, and they're like, we're just going to turn you into a missile in the run game. And he made it work. So, I mean, I don't know how much it matters to Beane which one Cole Bishop is because he's got Rap who has played both.
That's the mystery of this to me. Like cornerback, there are veteran names that they're going to be able to get a veteran on a reasonable contract. I'm not worried about that. Safety is what concerns me. And it's, who are you going to bring in here? Don't you dare pay for that. Right. Don't you dare pay a premium for that when you've proven over the years you can get by with almost nothing at safety. You've figured a way to cobble it together. If you have a second round pick and you have a Taylor Rapp and you have these other things, then go get another body, but don't you dare pay a premium for that. But I bet you there's still people out there. I think about the guys like Ashton Davis from the Jets who, guy's a starter. On the Jets tend to bring in the worst players who don't go on to get second contracts. Ashton Davis might be the guy who does it, leaves the franchise, and actually improves.
Yeah, I mean the other thing they could do, Buffalo, is they could go out and get 2 corners and finally finish the conversion of Cam Lewis from corner to safety like they wanted to do last year, but he kept having to step in because they didn't have anybody behind Teron Johnson, right?
This is true too.
And, so they could just we're just going to go get 2 of these veteran, decently priced corners. Either one can start. The winner wins. The loser rotates in, or is the primary backup. Jamarcus Ingram is still on the roster. And then they're like, okay, Cam, you're a free safety now. And then Bishop, you're going to play whichever of the 2 spots you can win out. And we're going to draft a kid, or we'll sign a bargain basement, 2-way, special teams / safety guy. And he'll be
for
the backup.
Everybody who thinks we're talking in circles around these things. I want you to take this away from tonight's podcast. We used to live in a place where we had to sit here and agonize over the individual skill sets of every single player we wanted to add to this football team. We had to sit here and go, well, I need this safety. Why? Because he does this one specific thing really well. And what about this? And this guy, he might be worth the money if I spend it at cornerback because he's really good in zone and he can do. We've reached a place as a football team where we don't have to give a shit about the individual skill set. Because our coaching staff has proven that they can put a guy into the right position. It's like Kyrie Elam stands out as this just giant sore thumb because this staff has been so good at finding a role for every single person they put on the roster.
Yeah.
And so in that way, when they go out there and they find a guy worth $3 million, they pay $3 million for a cornerback to go play across from Christian Benford, and you go, oh, I don't know that guy, and he didn't have a great year last year. To me, that doesn't mean he won't be fine.
Right.
Because they found ways to make it fine in the past. Hell, we had Dane Jackson playing for us in an AFC divisional round game that we had to lead with 13 seconds left.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing too is how many times, and Chris, we go back years doing these shows, right? Like how many times did we have these conversations leading up to the draft where it's like best player available type of situation, right? And you had to be nitpicky because you only had so many picks to address an entire team worth of needs, right? And now we're going into this draft season being like, offensive line, who gives a shit? We have an offensive line. Quarterback, who gives a shit? We got the reigning MVP. Running back, who gives a shit? We got a guy who wants $15 million a year and is probably worth that to another team, right? Tight end, who gives a shit? We got 2 guys that are probably tight end ones on half the teams in the league, right? Like those positions, the fact that they're shored up makes it easier to talk through these other positions because that's the only thing you have to worry about. The only thing the Bills have to worry about this year, what are you going to do at cornerback 2? What are you going to do at safety depth? What are you going to do at defensive line? And what are you going to do about a wide receiver? Do you need another wide receiver? Right? Like those are the 4 questions going into this draft. And that's a far departure from where I was when I was doing my show with Icy way back when we were a lot of people trying to convince ourselves that Tyrod Taylor was okay at quarterback, right? Like we were having the conversation that the Jets are having this season.
Oh, I wasn't. I was getting drunk in his kitchen and screaming at the top of my lungs.
But Icy and I were legitimately having that. I had a debate with Icy who was like, yeah, Tyrod Taylor's good enough to win with. I'm like, what are we talking about?
Hey, it's come full circle. He's good enough for the Jets to win.
And his argument was he's the best quarterback we've had in years. I'm like, he's king of the crap heap. So now the Jets are having that. Imagine being a Jets fan, Drew. Chris, imagine being a Jets fan. 2 off seasons ago, you had the NFL by the balls, right? Won the off season. Aaron Rodgers. He's the guy. If we finally have our best quarterback since Namath.
This past offseason, we got told by the national media, Chris, I was laughing because tonight this video will constitute our 250th video on YouTube. And I was looking back through all of our thumbnails, and I still think my favorite is when we won the division again. And we did Mac from Always Sunny when he was trying to prove that science is a liar sometimes. And we just said the media is a liar. And there's Emmanuel Acho and Craig Carton and some of these other more, Peter Schrager, and everyone who predicted our demise. And it was that concept right there of guys, we got told this past year that it was over for us. Now you're starting to, and the Jets were going to take over, and now you have fucking Tyrod Taylor.
Yeah.
And the Dolphins have no money, and they're impotent, and it's like I've never seen a weaker, like, I feel like all the air has come right out of that fan base, that franchise.
Yeah, I mean, you look at like the Patriots are another example.
They don't
right?
even seem like they're excited about this.
Right. You look at these teams that are we talked about at the open of the show, right? All the teams that have all this money to spend in free agency. That used to be Buffalo.
Yes.
But the reason you've got all that money to spend in free agency is because you don't have anybody on the roster. You don't have anybody on the roster that's good enough to pay. So, like, cool, you've got $100 million to spend. You've also got 15 starters that you have to figure out where you're going to start like 15 brand new guys next season, right? Like, there's a reason that these teams have a lot of cap space. There's a reason that teams that are very, very good don't have cap space because they have guys that they needed to pay that are really, really good. Like, this is a good problem to have. Like, nitpicking over who's going to be like, who's going to replace Damar Hamlin, right? Like, that's a way better situation to be in than where we were 6 years ago when we were like, is Tyrod Taylor good enough to get him to the Pro Bowl or to the playoffs? I don't know. Like, like it just boggles my mind that like there's so many people in this space right now. And I say like this podcast, this like space that got into this space like 4 years ago that have never had to talk about the battle between Nathan Peterman and Tyrod Taylor, right? Like you never had to have that conversation, right? You never had to listen to a podcast where it was like, well, EJ Manuel, yeah, he threw it over the 10th in training camp, but it was one throw. He's been pretty good for the most part. Like those are words that have come out of my mouth doing this. Right. And like these guys that come along, I mean, you guys are like, besides hashtag, probably the ones that have been in the game the longest, right? You and hashtag now that Icy and I aren't doing things anymore. We had those conversations. Yep. There's a reason that you drank and got drunk every time you did the show because you were debating like, well, maybe Nathan Peterman does have it.
I can drink my way to Nathan. Chris, I want you to. I have a bit of homework. We're gonna come back next week for it. I want you to go back and see if you can scour the archives and find the audio of us talking about like Nathan Peterman winning the starting job out of training camp over Josh Allen, and like before that week 1 start at the Ravens. I want you to go find that audio because that's where we live now. We live in a place where it's hilarious to look back at these things and say to ourselves, we live now in a different time than we ever have as content producers. As Bills fans, we are not in the same place, and we're so close. We're so close to a thing that people have literally gone their entire lifetimes pining for and never having seen.
Yeah.
I guess we have to be somewhat subjective then when we talk about what's a win, what's a loss, what a failure in free agency this year looks like.
Yeah. I mean, listen, like I will fully admit this. An actual argument that I made was, yeah, EJ Manuel threw 2 pick sixes when they played the Jaguars in London, but he also almost won the football game for him at the end, right? Like that's a debate that I had with a microphone in front of my face on camera.
That
like,
same game?
Sure. You know, yeah, he threw 2 pick sixes, and had he not done that, they probably win the football game. But he almost had them at the end, right? Like he had, if the defense could have come up with one more stop, like
Chris was nice enough not to abandon me in my home by myself because I planned a party and no one showed up for that game. My friends were all too hungover.
The game started at 9:30.
So it was me and Chris, a sheet breakfast pizza from Tops, 3 Magnum bottles of champagne, and 3 gallons of orange juice and beers and stuff. I drank 2 of those Magnum bottles of champagne to my face and then proceeded to scream into a microphone for what had to be like 28 minutes that Chris had to boil down into 1.5 minutes of usable audio. He's like, we can't air this. Your reaction podcast is inadmissible. He goes, in fact, the only place this is admissible is in court. When they
That's how we found out that we should not do post game.
I was just going to say, Chris, you remember? I was literally just going to bring up the post-game press conferences where you guys built a podium and you Drew out there in front of God and everybody. And just like, this is a good idea. Like, this is going to work out. Trust me.
I have a permanent chip in my elbow because I fell off the podium. After screaming about the Bills beating the Titans and how Josh Allen sucks as our quarterback and he's not the answer, I chipped my elbow forever. Now, if I bump it too hard, it swells up and fills up with blood. And I have that and his MVP award this past season to go, damn it, we've been doing this for too long.
Yeah.
But I've been doing it for too long to get worried about what the Bills are going to do in free agency. Like, if we seem glib and we don't seem as entertaining about this, it's because I want to inform you. I more want to interact with the people who still stick around for this stuff, because I don't feel like I have anything left to teach you. If you've been around as long as we have, you've seen it all, you've lived it all, you've experienced it, you've lamented, you've cheered. We're all in the same place.
Yeah.
And so with that, I'm interested to see how they try to, I did not to invoke the PETA friendly people, but there's more than one way to skin a cat.
Yeah.
And there's more than one solution to a problem. The problem being the pass rush. Defensive line is probably the paramount issue if you really want to go win a Super Bowl. Mm-hmm. It's the one thing we haven't been able to get in the playoffs. I mean, there's avenues.
Yep.
There's mechanisms. It all comes down to now one guy. Everything that we've just talked about tonight comes down to one person, Brandon Beane. This week is going to kind of be a referendum on how he views the next 2 years for the Buffalo Bills, because they will be the two most important years of Josh Allen's career. Can you help backstop him with enough talent on the other side of the ball that when the playoffs roll around, they don't do what they've done every single year and just disappear?
Yep. I mean, and the other thing, too, is we were doing draft shows like the year before they drafted Ed Oliver.
Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, like, we've done this long enough to know that none of what we're doing between now and the draft matters.
Nope.
None of this matters. Like, you can tune in and there's plenty of guys that are out there that are doing really good draft prep work. Right.
Sure.
Like, and we used to, I mean, you can attest to it, right? We used to put a lot of time into our draft prep. And I remember the year that I stopped doing draft prep was the same exact year that the first year that we did it, because it was me and Icy and Paul and Mario, and I think you might have joined us, where it was like, we had our favorites, right? Like, Icy had his favorite, I had and none of them got picked.
Nope.
And I'm just like, okay, like, none of this matters, right? Like, we all hated the Josh Allen pick. We all hated the Ed Oliver pick. We hated the AJ Epinesa pick.
So we used to do the draft shows at 34 Rush.
Yeah, Batavia Downs.
At Batavia Downs. And I will never forget the first one that I didn't go to, where they traded the pick back to 27 so that we could take Trey White. Mm-hmm. And you guys had to just vamp.
Yeah. Because they were supposed to pick like ninth. Like, they were supposed to pick like ninth that year. And we were like, yeah, get ready. We had all these giveaways. We had all these, like, everybody was watching. Like, there was a live crowd. We were all pumped up and ready. Ninth pick rolls through. They traded it to 27.
And now you guys
now it's 11:30 at night before they make a pick. We're 4 hours into this show.
Chris, from a production standpoint, what a nightmare that turned into, because we tried to do a podcast at my house with a room full of people.
Yeah, that failed.
That failed miserably.
Because the goal was, right? I
thought we'd hit 45 minutes of audio.
We only need to prep long enough until the pick is made, and then the content creates itself, because then you talk about how the player fits in. You talk about all the, what do they do now that they've picked the player? And then it's like, well, by the way, now you're going to wait another 3.5 hours. And they're like, well, okay.
All of this is to say, we've been through all of this before. God bless anybody who's getting into the space who wants to tell you it's something different.
Sure.
Guys, it comes down to a few things. We've got this thing tent-poled already. We were a couple plays away from going to a Super Bowl this year.
In a down year.
The core of that team is coming back, and they're going to build around it, hypothetically. It's just how. That's the interesting thing, because at this point, we've seen it all. But it comes down to the guy pulling the levers as to whether or not he has the stomach for what it might take to create an Eagles-esque Super Bowl run. Don't know. I can't wait to find out, though.
Yep.
Guys, this has been a lot of fun. But we gotta get the hell out of here. I mean, what are we, an hour 20? Everyone's gonna be mad about this. Chris is mad, I can tell.
They'll see my name on the show and they'll be like, oh, it's gonna be a long one.
Guys,
Chris doesn't even give us rap anymore when I'm on because he knows we're just gonna go.
Run.
Yeah. I steam throw through the raps.
Guys, I'm Drew Gear. That's Chris Kruger. Ryan, where can people follow you on social media?
Yeah, at Ryan Lasel _RSN. Still the voice of the Brockport Golden Eagles Division III football on Rock Sports Network. Also on #sports. We're starting to kind of ramp up. We're going to start doing Mondays and Wednesdays.
Do you have your own show yet?
Not yet. We're working on it.
Guys,
it's in the works.
I want you to tweet at #sports and just
God, please.
Just badger them into it. Give Ryan a show. Free Lasel.
Free Lasel.
#Free Lasel. This has been a lot of fun, but we got to get the hell out of here. Drew Gear, Ryan Lasel, Chris Kruger, and this has been your Rock Pile Report.